Israel wouldn't have been able to fight in Gaza for more than a month. Every single bomb that has been dropped, every single missile that has been fired, every single shell that has come out of an artillery piece has come from the Americans. The mechanisms of international law are completely impotent. I think it's now safe to say, with some certainty, that there is a strategy that is being followed, the outline of a plan, if you like, to completely depopulate the entirety of the Gaza Strip. We're heading very, very quickly for a time in which might, naked power, is everything. Sovereignty gone, and governments, powerful governments, have the right to do whatever they like to you.
James, how would you like to describe yourself?
I'm a journalist and a historian, and for the last 20 months now, I've been writing about this war on Gaza, mostly for the New Republic magazine in the United States, and the result is blowing up everything is beautiful.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, the title itself it's almost a direct quote. So it was said by a guy called Amichai Eliyahu, who's the heritage minister in Israel. And I think quite early in the war, I think in November of 2023, he posted on Facebook, because of course, where else, with an image of a bulldozer, which alongside, the missiles and the tank shells, the bulldozer is the sort of one of the primary weapons by which this annihilation is being carried out. And he, posted this image, and alongside it, he had the caption, "North Gaza is more beautiful than ever, blowing up and flattening, everything is beautiful." Now, these sorts of things are said sort of every single day by leading Israeli politicians and military officers. And I think, some years in the future, when we do have a hearing at the International Court of Justice, when Israel will be called to account for its crimes, called to account for violations of the Genocide Convention, intent will matter almost as much as the sort of factual basis of evidence. And there's plenty of evidence of intent. I mean, at the start of the book, I have an extensive list of things that Israeli politicians have said. From Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister, I think on October 7th or the morning after, addressing his generals and saying, "We're cutting off all fuel, all food, all water, all medicine. This is a total siege. We're fighting human animals, and we're acting accordingly."
A point in part actually defended by our own Prime Minister, who was asked a couple of days later.
Is there anything at this point that Keir Starmer won't defend? In this last week, we've seen this Labour government designate Palestine Action as a terrorist group, which is kind of extraordinary because who has been flying spy missions over Gaza, surveillance missions? That's the RAF, who has refused to remove themselves from the manufacturing process for parts for the F-35 jet, used extensively by the IDF and by the Air Force. That would be this Labour government. And David Lammy, on the basis of saying why we weren't pulling out of the manufacturing parts for the F-35, he said, because it would upset commercial contracts. So profits are being put ahead of people, which is not exactly something you should expect from a Labour government.
This was actually just raised today, a couple of minutes before this interview began. Sarah Champion, who is the chair of the International Development Committee, I believe, she has written to Jonathan Reynolds to ask about our involvement with supplying these F-35s. Are we breaking international law? I don't know if she'll get a reply.
They will try and avoid replying, if at all possible. As I say, there's nothing, it seems, that the Labour government won't do. They sanctioned Bezalel Smotrich and Ismail Ben-Gvir, the most extreme right-wing members of the Israeli government. I mean, that should have happened decades ago.
Is the fear of that, because there was some criticism drawn after that decision was taken, that America should have been consulted, and that was stepping out of line with America without actually... perhaps without there not being much of an achievement alongside that, any benefit to doing so. I mean, let's sort of draw back a little bit. How much of our intervention in the Israel-Gaza conflict, this leg of it, how much of that do you think is down to our relationship with America?
All of it, completely. Don't forget that, we depend on the Americans we live under a nuclear umbrella provided by the Americans. And Gary Wills has a great term for this, which is bomb power, which is the United States gets to do whatever it wants to do because it has nuclear weapons, and it gets to dictate the foreign policy of other countries. That doesn't necessarily because they dictate the foreign policy of other countries that they don't have willing partners, and the Americans are the critical thing here, right? Without the munitions, the moral support, the sort of legal line backing, Israel wouldn't have been able to fight in Gaza for more than a month. Every single bomb that has been dropped, every single missile that has been fired, every single shell that has come out of an artillery piece has come from the Americans.
Every single one?
Pretty much, yeah.
That's different to every single one, though,
Some
isn't
from
it?
the Germans as well, and that's another sort of situation. But they have their own hang-ups in Germany about Israel.
Okay. I suppose we should. This leads us really onto Iran, doesn't it? If you're talking about dictating foreign policy, as well, you say that the Americans are dictating foreign policy. Is that what was happening in Iran with that sudden strike a couple of days ago?
Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying since, I think, 1992, when he was just a lowly member of the Knesset, that Iran is 3 to 5 years away from having the bomb. And he pops up with his jowls wobbling every couple of years to threaten about Iran's nuclear ambitions. Somebody at the New York Times, I think, pointed this out quite wittily when he said, Iran, if it really is building a nuclear program, has taken the longest amount of time to build a nuke out of all of the nuclear-armed nations in the world. Look, if the Iranian regime is serious about its own security, then it should have a nuclear weapon as well. It should fast-track its nuclear program and build its own bomb. It seems to be that the only way to ensure, to guarantee your immunity from American aggression is to build a bomb. Now, this would be a disaster. All nuclear weapons are a complete disaster. But that's the sort of strategic logic that's at work here. This is what deterrence means. And if these most recent airstrikes have done anything at all, far beyond the damage that it's caused to these nuclear facilities or to all of the lost lives, be they in the Revolutionary Guards Corps or just among ordinary civilians in Tehran, it's to make sure that the regime feels a siege mentality and indeed hastens that attempt to obtain a nuclear weapon.
Are you able to write about this for the American publication that you work for?
About Iran?
Yeah, are they receptive to these sort of ideas in America?
It's hard to say. I'm not really an Iran guy. It's a bit outside of my wheelhouse. I don't suppose why they wouldn't be.
Even on, the subject of Israel-Gaza, because we've seen this huge clampdown, especially on college campuses across America. You've seen deportations, students being held by ICE when they have appeared at Palestine rallies. I just wonder, as a journalist, if you are writing in that sort of climate, does it feel febrile?
Incredibly, yeah. I mean, I can't probably go back to the United States now. I'm definitely not getting let into Israel. They just changed their visa rules a couple of months ago that say, one of the stipulations was if you have even advocated for some international body even investigating any kind of war crime, then you're not coming into Israel. That's not because of what I've written. It's because those governments disagree with the positions that I'm taking and the arguments that I'm making. I have to thank my editors at the New Republic because they've never pushed back on really anything that I've tried to put in print. There are safe havens, there are silos in which this stuff is still allowed to be said.
I mean, that must be frustrating, though, if you're not going to be allowed back into Israel because, the only way to access the Gaza Strip and parts of the West Bank is via Israel.
Sure, or through Egypt, but that border's been closed for a long time. Gaza has been completely closed to all foreign press. The only people from the outside who have been allowed in are people like that Twinkie Quisling and bargain bin Enoch Powell, Douglas Murray. Though I think he's probably upgraded to a sort of bargain bin Oswald Mosley at this point. But he went on a tour of Gaza, I think sometime last year, in an IDF-provided flak vest, talking to IDF officers who he quotes and repeats verbatim without checking whatever it is that they say. and then puts out a book of complete fabrication, and then receives an award from the Israeli president, Isaac Herzog, the man who said there is no such thing as an uninvolved civilian. So we've depended on Palestinian journalists who are one by one being picked off by Israeli airstrikes. The Israelis will say far in advance that some particular journalist is affiliated with Hamas in some way and never provides any evidence for it. And then some months down the line, that threat will be made true and they'll be knocked off. It's grotesque. And so in a way, what I'm trying to do is to pick up that slack, if you like. What journalists in Gaza can't do, I will try to do on their behalf.
Not to, well, I am going to engage in whataboutery, but why do you think that the West is enraged when we hear about Putin's control of the narrative? That's something I think that's widely reported on, that journalism or free journalism certainly doesn't exist within Russia, and there are suppositions that many Russian civilians actually do not know the full extent of the Ukraine war. That infuriates many broadcasters in this country. But when Palestinian journalists are murdered, oftentimes it doesn't even make the news at 10.
The complicity, and that's a strong word, that a lot of media organizations in the West have in not reporting what's in front of their faces, is quite extraordinary. And it's galling in a way, because it's so easy to recognize what's being done as one of the worst crimes of our age. It's part of the reason why I wanted to put this in a book, because so much of this conflict lives under a shroud of deceit and disinformation and outright lies and propaganda. And it affects people who think that they might be sympathetic to what's going on. They want to learn more about it, but they don't know where to turn. And so my book, in a way, is an attempt to cut through all of that. And if some parts of the media won't do their jobs, it falls to independent journalists to fill in that gap.
Well, so let's delve into some of the findings in the book. You talk about an extermination. What do you mean by that?
Many years after some terrible atrocity, historians will often trouble their souls trying to work out whether there was a schematic or a blueprint or a master plan that was followed. Who did what and when? What orders were they following? I think it's now safe to say, with some certainty, that there is a strategy that is being followed, the outline of a plan, if you like, to completely depopulate the entirety of the Gaza Strip. And it's a sort of pincer movement. It follows two tracks. On the one side, you have this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has built 4 armoured citadels in the south of the Gaza Strip, where Palestinians have to go to collect aid, the only aid that they're allowed to have access to. And then, even before it began operation, I don't think anyone really expected that there would just be massacres, just shootings at these aid sites. But the goal of the plan, the operation of this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, was to concentrate the entire population in the south and to make it entirely dependent on the aid that the Israelis choose to let in. That's one side of the track. The other side of the track is an Israeli government ministry, which was started earlier this year. It's called the Voluntary Emigration Bureau, which is a sort of Orwellian title. Again, Bezalel Smotrich, the Israeli finance minister, was sort of musing out loud at a meeting at the Knesset just before the creation of this Voluntary Emigration Bureau. And he said, well, if we took out 10,000 a day, it'll take 6 months. By take out, he means deport, not just kill, though he also means that as well. If we take out 10,000 a day, it'll take a year. If we take out 5,000 a day, other way around. If we take out 10,000 a day, it'll take 6 months. 5,000 a day, it'll take a year. These are the terms in which the Israelis are thinking. And the Voluntary Emigration Bureau is there to build the infrastructure necessary to see that almost the entirety of the Palestinian population of Gaza is expelled. There will be an exodus. Now, you might say, well, Benjamin Netanyahu hasn't found a third country or a selection of third countries to send the Palestinians to. In my mind, that's less important. The practicalities are less important than the intent that it proves, that the total destruction of Gaza is on the cards, and this is exactly what the Israelis intend to do.
I worry about the word extermination.
Sure.
You seem to be a journalist that's concerned with words, a writer that is careful with his words.
Sure.
Is there intent behind the use of that word, extermination?
Extermination, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, what else could it be? Every single facet of Gazan society is being destroyed. That includes people's homes. Something like 80% of all homes, probably more now, have been completely bulldozed. The IDF was running out of explosives to do controlled demolitions on apartment blocks. And as I mentioned before, the bulldozer is as much a weapon of the IDF's campaign of conquest as bombs or missiles. People's homes, they have no food. We've just come out of an 11-week siege in which no aid was let in at all. In which, the world hasn't seen urban hunger this extreme and concentrated since the siege of Leningrad ended in 1944. Museums, mosques, churches, cultural centres, parks, every single facet of Gazan society is being deliberately wrecked. I don't know what other words you would use to describe the totality of that other than extermination.
I often find myself reading, well, when a headline is released, something on the lines of "there is a mass famine in Gaza, mass starvation," there are naysayers who say that is categorically not true. Mm. Just sort of in layman's terms, this is going to sound like an almost ridiculous question. How do you know it is true?
Which part?
How do you know that there is starvation in Gaza? How do you know that there is a famine?
There's a vast international mechanism in place. The acronym escapes my mind for a second. That is incredibly rigorous and incredibly detailed. And, midway through this 11-week siege, earlier this year, their starvation maps were shaded completely red. And so they will take samples in many ways like a sort of political poll amongst the population about their access to food, what they ate in the last couple of weeks. And it's a very finely calibrated process that comes up with these numbers. And they've been tried and tested in conflicts in places like Sudan.
You see, I think it's an important question because even though it sounds rather, I will know people will be watching this saying, how on earth can she ask this? But it's very difficult because as you've said already, you don't have access to Gaza. You don't have access to Israel. You don't have access to, you can't go and look at it on the ground. You're depending on the intermittent reports that come from inside Gaza. It's a rather extraordinary time because it really does leave it open to subjectivity. You can lie about it. Do you ever feel like that?
That I could lie about?
Or that a bad faith actor could lie about what's going on inside Gaza?
Sure, and many do. But don't forget that the Israeli leadership also boasts about these things. I think just a couple of hours ago, alongside these aid stations set up by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, there is a small trickle of aid that has been let in from UN groups into the north of Gaza, which is otherwise completely cut off. The Israeli government cut that supply chain, that supply of aid into the north of Gaza just a couple of hours ago. And it did so on the basis that Bezalel Smotrich, again, I use him as an example many times because he says what he thinks and he is representative of what most of the Israeli cabinet thinks, and certainly the military leadership as well. He threatened to withdraw from the government coalition, which would collapse the government completely if that aid wasn't cut off. So in that sense, there's whatever way you look at this, there is proof to be found. But above and beyond anything else, Palestinians will tell you.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me about what you meant by the moral order of the world.
Sure. Well, the moral order of the world is sort of a thing that I use in the preface to the book, which was written back in February. And it's a way to sort of sum up the regnant international, legal, moral order that has been, for want of a better term, in charge of the world since the Second World War, and especially since the Nuremberg verdicts were handed down in 1946. And those principles are equal access to justice, freedom from discrimination, international law, human rights. We sort of know what these things are. Now, those things took a bit of a holiday during the Cold War. They weren't exactly things that were clung to with any determination. But it was what people believed, and it was an aspiration at the very least. And that is in danger of total collapse, that moral order. The way that we thought the world worked has been proved not true. It's been destroyed, in fact, alongside Gaza, because of Gaza. And
only because of Gaza?
Well, no, I mean, the Russian invasion of Ukraine plays a major part of that. But it's also a different aspect of it, which is, at Nuremberg, the judges said that the crime of aggression was the principal crime, far above anything else. And that was the principal crime that was violated when Russia invaded Ukraine, alongside all of the other civilian atrocities. But it's also a matter of legitimacy, right? So people look at what's happening in Gaza. They look at the number of hearings that were held at the International Court of Justice all through last year. They see that the ICJ judges issued a ruling in May of last year when the Israelis were about to invade Rafah, which, by the way, is a city that just no longer exists. It's gone, it's vanished, razed to the ground. And the ICJ ordered the Israeli government not to continue with its assault on Rafah. What did the Israelis do? They went ahead and did it anyway. It proved to a lot of people that the mechanisms of international law are completely impotent.
Because they're operating on some sort of old boys club handshake? Or, I mean, why? Why could you not uphold the rule of law?
Because it was in many ways, I mean, before the creation of the International Criminal Court, from the Rome Statute, which obliges all of the states that are party to it to arrest anyone with an arrest warrant out if they ever step foot in that territory. When the ICC issued its warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the day after that happened, Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, said, well, actually, I don't think we have to arrest them if they ever land on British territory. So before the creation of the ICC, and that's with its own enforcement mechanism, it was difficult, extremely difficult, for anybody to bring actions under particular parts of the law, and it remains difficult. The lack of enforcement is the primary difficulty. But again, as I say, it's about legitimacy. Because if you watch, as many people have, with a sympathetic face, well, these people over here are massacred and starved and slaughtered and their homes destroyed and everything that they ever cared about ruined. And at the same time, international law, as we know it, the thing that we thought was supposed to protect the defenseless and the innocent, has been proved completely impotent. That means that my own protection is gone. I'm just like them, alone, undefended. And that's a very terrifying place for people to realize that they've ended up. We're heading very, very quickly for a time in which might, naked power, is everything. Sovereignty, gone. And governments, powerful governments, have the right to do whatever they like to you.
So a court like the ICC, do you think it has any legs anymore?
It's difficult. I mean, there will be a hearing at the ICJ. Both courts are based out of The Hague, frustratingly. The ICC's process is difficult, again, because it depends on voluntary arrests of figures out with arrest warrants, right? And, in the weeks after those arrest warrants were issued for Netanyahu and Gallant, the Home Secretaries or Interior Ministries of most European countries said exactly the same thing that Yvette Cooper said, that maybe there's a sort of loophole or a cutout that we can use that doesn't oblige us to arrest Netanyahu and Gallant if they ever show up in the country. Many, many times. I mean, when Netanyahu went to speak at the US Congress, he flew through the airspace of several European countries. Did they order those planes down? No, they didn't.
They could have.
They could have. Absolutely, they could have. And it would have been the right thing to do. It makes people feel incredibly nervous when their own governments, doesn't have to be the British or American or German government, the French or the Italians, when, the heads of your own country won't enforce international law.
I want to talk about, you raised a horrible term, actually, just before we started, and I wanted to ask you what you meant by it. You said the kill chain.
Sure, yeah.
What did you mean by that?
Again, going back to the ICJ, the kill chain will be an incredibly important and difficult thing to prove. There is a chain of command. This is still a war that is going on in Gaza. I know people don't... it's possible for genocides to still be committed during wartime, but there is still, Hamas is still resisting. Just a couple of days ago, there was, I think, 8 IDF soldiers who were killed in a single bomb attack by Hamas. There's still a war going on. There's a chain of command that IDF soldiers are bound to, and that chain of command goes all the way up to the war cabinet. So in order to prove that crimes have taken place beyond any shadow of a doubt, you have to have every single step along the way. That's quite a difficult thing to do. But I hope that my next project, my next piece that I write, will be something that follows the kill chain all the way up from an individual person or a family, perhaps, and sort of demonstrating in capsule form that this is a possibility, that we can do this, that we can follow the evidence where it leads.
It's horrific.
Completely.
I think we should probably talk about Palestine Action before we finish.
Sure, yeah.
Which doesn't feature in the book quite, but maybe in the next piece.
There's a brief mention. Yeah.
My apologies. Palestine Action, soon to be prescribed. We have had the announcement that they will be. June 30th is when we expect that to come into force. What do you think the ramifications of prescribing that group will be?
We hear too often the term chilling effect, but that is absolutely something that will take place. If people were worried about going on protest marches every single Saturday in London or wherever they find themselves, they worry, don't they? That even if they show up at a peaceful demonstration, that either they're going to get kettled by the cops, or they're going to be somehow regarded as a terrorist. But in a strange sort of way, if we ignore, well, not ignore, but if we put aside how radical their actions are, their aims are actually kind of conservative in a strange way. What are they asking? For the British government to find itself in accordance with international law. That's all they're asking. They're not asking for, Hamas to be in power or anything outrageous like that. They're saying the British government should be upholding international law. And that's it. And that's a goal that deserves to be defended and achieved by any means.
What do you think the ramifications will be for journalists, if any?
In Britain or?
In Britain. I tell you what my concerns are.
Sure, yeah.
I'm concerned as a publisher. I don't fully understand the parameters of where this prescription or how it will be enforced. I worry that if I go out and interview someone on the street about their concern for Palestine, if perhaps they have previously pledged allegiance or they've got on their social media some allegiance to Palestine Action, whether as a publisher we'll be liable for that. And I don't know where the government, where the Home Office in particular, is on the where they are in terms of what they would want to prosecute. And I worry because I don't think that they would go after large organisations like the BBC and Sky. I think they'd go for smaller outlets where perhaps our speech sometimes can be a bit perhaps a bit more outlandish than what you would find on mainstream broadcasting. So I'm concerned about it from that perspective.
Sure.
I'm worried about how we are going to cover this conflict, because not only are we, as journalists, not allowed to go in, you have very limited access. The access that we have had are to people who turn up on our streets here in London or in Manchester or Liverpool. And I worry that we now may not be able to speak to them.
That's completely valid. And one of the ways that that this ruling shouldn't be allowed to go ahead. I mean, I suppose, speaking to you as we're both journalists, we have to be brave, I think. We owe it to the people whose lives are being thrown away.
I agree. The book, Blowing Up Gaza.
Blowing up everything is
beautiful.
Yeah.
Excuse me. The Extermination of Gaza. Out now?
Yeah.
Link will be in the bio.
I hope so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.